Welcome. Thank you for taking your time joining this session on, obviously, upgrading to Windows 10. It's been an interesting first, a little bit over a year now. Companies starting to either do full migrations or, as most companies are doing right now, they are piloting Windows 10. We've seen a quite much higher adoption rate in the US than over in Europe so far of Windows 10, but so far it's been the quickest adoption ever, at least in my experience. My name is Johan. I will be your host for 45 minutes. I absolutely love questions. And if you are not comfortable with asking them online in this room, feel free to use Twitter. We do have a Twitter tag for the AppManagEvent. And if you tweet them with my name also, I'll be able to respond to today's questions after this session. But by all means, if you have any questions here, just raise your hand and ask the question. I'll be happy to answer. I work as a consultant. I've been doing this for doing deployment all my life. I started when I was 16. I used to go down to a local computer shop after school and help them build computers, and they had to be deployed. DOS. It was easier back then. Copy 2 floppy disks, done. It's more interesting now. But that means I've been doing this for more than, lots of years actually, more than 25 years. And that means two things. One, obviously, I'm old. Two, I might not have seen everything, but I've seen a lot. So rather than you guys banging head against the wall, troubleshooting something, debugging something, have a question about something, reach out to me. I'm pretty good in responding. I also have a very unique last name, so I'm easy to find. I'm easy to find on social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And we're about 10 people in the world with this last name. And so far, I'm the only guy doing deployment. So we'll see. When I'm not doing consulting work, I try to speak at events like this. I do some trainings every now and then. I try to do that once a month because that keeps me on the edge. But I like to be out there doing things. All right. I'll be basically using demos throughout this presentation. This demo environment is available for download. So if you go to deployment research, you can search for the keyword hydration, and you will find a kit that builds these virtual machines I'm using here on stage. So if you want to quickly spin up a lab environment to play around with these things, that's a neat download. If you come to my session later this afternoon, I think it was 3 p.m., 1500, I will actually show you how to build a lab environment of this. But this is what I have: a domain controller, a config manager server, MDT server, and actually I have a bunch of clients as well, not just PC number 2. Now, the biggest challenge with Windows 10 deployment so far among all these companies hasn't been the OS itself, hasn't been the deployment tools, hasn't been drivers or imaging. No, not at all. It has been network. Never before in IT industry has it been more important to be friends with the networking team, because Windows 10 is going to hit your network, and it's going to hit it hard. And it's going to be depending on what you choose, how you want to deploy Windows 10. To give an example, there is a version of Windows 10 available for companies that runs a nuclear plant. That's the long-time servicing branch version of Windows 10. It doesn't get updated as often. Those big updates, basically a new version of Windows 10, they are called feature updates. They just changed that name. So that's like a new version of Windows 10. It's 3 gigs in size. It comes like twice a year for normal Windows 10 users. But for long-time servicing branch, it comes like once a year, every second year, every now and then, longer time frame in between. But updates in Windows 10, they are cumulative, meaning the October update contains September, that contains August, that contains July. So they just grow in size. The normal version of Windows 10, the non-LTSB version, meaning current branch or current branch for business, they are reset every half year. So every half year, you deploy a 3 gig update, sure, but the next month is a small update. That will be bigger and bigger and bigger until the next refresh, and that will be small again. Long time servicing branch, grow, 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 grow. Imagine doing that for 3 years, having cumulative update growing every single month, and not just once a month these days, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times per month. You need to deploy those updates. The latest CU that came just last week had an interesting twist to it. It simply didn't deploy on all machines. So they just looped. Downloaded a gig, tried to install it, didn't work. Downloaded a gig, tried to install it, didn't work. I was following an email thread for a small customer. Not very many people in it, but they didn't have a local infrastructure. All their machines were connecting out. So they had a bunch of machines constantly re-downloading a gig of update, sometimes several times a day. They couldn't even get an email out. So this is something you need to pay attention to when starting to plan for Windows 10 deployment. If you compare with Windows 7, you can expect at least 5 times, not percent, 5 times, the data on the network to keep it up to date, and you have to. There is no pick and choose anymore. You have to do these updates. And the fun part, they're coming for Windows 7 as well, starting this month. But they are not cumulative for Windows 7. They are for Windows 10. So for Windows 7, it's only that month's update in a package. So September will be September update, November will be November updates only, not cumulative. But still, it's easier to deploy one patch than 35. Yeah, anyway. Then we have group policies as an interesting factor. I was working with a customer in Stockholm last year, just before Christmas. They were running Windows 7, as most companies are still. And they started to pilot a bunch of Windows 10 machines into the same OU structure where their Windows 7 machines were. They were using AppLocker to secure those Windows 7 machines, and I'm sure Paula likes AppLocker, but in Windows 10, these are applications. Start menu is an application, search is an application, so they were actually blocking those apps. And if you try to use a Windows 10 box as an end user without the start menu, without the search, it's quite interesting. I can tell you, just to troubleshoot that machine as a technician is pretty difficult as well. But that was a scenario where we have Windows 7 policies breaking things in Windows 10. So in Windows 10 deployment project, I recommend you, at least in the pilot, take the opportunity of start fresh. I mean, group policies has been around since what? Windows 2000? That's 16 years ago. And I bet you have some of those policies still in place. Are they needed anymore? Nobody knows. The person that created them left the company 10 years ago. So take the opportunity to start fresh. Create a separate OU structure for Windows 10 boxes. Add only the absolutely needed policy. I understand there are policies that you do need. You need to get your certificates so you can actually do things in your environment. You may need to get wireless information. You need to have some policies for Windows updates, for example. But just link in a few of them, and then add more as needed. Because it may be that it's been a while since you did the last overhaul of your group policy settings. So, then we have the deployment scenarios for Windows 10. It's just one that is added, and that's the InPlace upgrade. When Microsoft started to talk about this about 2 years ago, and even at Ignite last Ignite, they claimed that 80% of the companies would run this process. I thought, well, maybe 20%. I was wrong. So far, we haven't had a single customer that I worked with or visited in one way or another that has been using the InPlace upgrade scenario. Not a single one. And yet, all of my customers have done it. Now that's for a morning twist. They didn't do it when they went from Windows 7 to Windows 10, but they do it when they go from Windows 10 version to a new Windows 10 version, because that process is also an in-place upgrade that are affected by the same limitations as the Windows 10, as the in-place upgrade. Let me just see if I can find the actual internet cable I was promised. I have power, I have display. That's only Wi-Fi. Let's steal, borrow. You're not hacking this, are you? No, just checking. I don't think I installed it on this guy. I didn't. I'll fix this later. Or I'll fix this now. I was kind of promised a cable, so I thought I will have that. It is. I probably don't have the driver. No, I'll have to skip that for now. So, in-place upgrades are not being used. Companies are instead doing the same opportunities as for group policies. They start fresh with Windows 10. Because one of the reasons for doing an in-place upgrade is that you need to be happy. You need to be happy with what you actually have in your environment. Because an in-place upgrade is going to take you from what you have exactly to the same config, but now running Windows 10. So if you have crap, it will still be crap, but running Windows 10 with crap on. So that's the difference. But there are some limitations to the in-place upgrade scenario, and in lack of internet access, I will borrow WordPad. So what are the limitations of an in-place upgrade? Well, first of all, I will come back to this, but there is a ton of settings, features in Windows 10 that requires you guys to be on UEFI. And you guys aren't, because you're running Windows 7. And when you deploy Windows 7 to a machine, you deploy it to a BIOS-based machine. And the reason is it's royal pain to deploy Windows 7 to a UEFI-based machines. There are some exceptions, but in general, it's no fun. Try to install Windows 7 on a Surface Pro and see how that goes. If you figure it out, call me, because I want to know. But there are a list of features, 10, 11 features that are depending on that configuration. Security features mostly, but also things like performance. Super speed in boot and in resume from hibernation. You'll be probably upset if you bought a tablet device and you flip the cover away from it and it takes 15 seconds to give you a display. You expect when you take the cover away, it's instant. That's the kind of speed that UEFI gives you. It gives you larger boot disks, and then it gives you all these security features that are only available if your machine is configured for it. You cannot do, supportedly, an in-place upgrade from BIOS and switch at the same time to UEFI. I will show you a different way to do it, automated, but it's not an in-place upgrade. It's using sequences to control that behavior. So, what else? Well, limitations for the in-place upgrade. Third-party disk encryption. That typically kills it. So if you're running McAfee or something on the box and try to do an in-place upgrade, typically it will break. Now in 16.07 of Windows 10, Microsoft added in the new options to the setup switch. It's called Reflect Drivers. So for some of the vendors running a very specific version of their product, you can actually install the driver and run through the in-place upgrade process. That assumes that every device of yours actually have that exact same version of the software, which you typically don't have. Third-party antivirus software typically breaks it. I won't mention any vendors, but Kaspersky. They will block the in-place upgrade. You may have customers, or you may be yourself, having still some 32-bit machines out there. You want to go to 64-bit machines or OS. Can't do that either. You can't switch language. That's not a problem over in the US, but it's a problem over here. How about that?
3 minutes, so it will be live.
My new hero. Wired wireless. How about that? We'll see if that works. 3 minutes. Well, I'll be, it's 1:30, so 1:33, check. These are the main ones. These are the main limitations in the InPlace upgrade. Oh, of course, there is this one also. You cannot use your own reference image. Forget that. You have to use Microsoft image. You can't have anything in it. It has to be a clean one. I mean, if you have an image with Office 2016 in it, and you have a machine with 2010, how is it supposed to be able to merge that? It can't. So it requires you to use the user-clean image. Now, the way I recommend to deal with this is to control these scenarios through sequences, not used by running setup. Not by running servicing either. In WSUS and in the SUP, if you use, how many are using Config Manager in here? About 30%. It works the same for WSUS. So let me just connect to this guy. Let's see if it wakes up. I have network. In only 1 minute, how about that? So let's see if it's up and running. Maybe it was 3 minutes after all. There we go. Nice. This is my blog. This is where I post most of my findings. This is where you can search for hydration, as I mentioned, but you can also search for limitations. And this is where I find a list of the InPlace upgrade limitations that I talked about. They're right here. But there is also on this blog a listing. If you search for UEFI, you have a listing of all features currently in Windows 10 that requires it. Will there be more features being added along the way that requires UEFI? Well, most likely, yes. So at some point, you need to do the switch. And so far, the customers I've been working with, they're doing the switch now, so they don't have to worry about it later. Some customers have been talking about a different approach. Existing machines, they will leave as is. But when they buy new machines, they will enable UEFI on them. And as the refresh to recycle goes, or cycle goes for the boxes, eventually in 3 years' time, the old one will be away, and everybody will be in UEFI. But most common is still to actually do the switch now. But I'll come back to that later. Sorry? Do not do the switch if you're still running Windows 7. No. It's painful. Very painful. There are some compatibility modes that you can play around with, but typically it's more pain than actual gain. Let me just get that in full screen. So in Config Manager, there is a new servicing node. This is an older one, it has 1511 in it. But this allows you to download upgrades, feature upgrades, and deploy them through Config Manager through the normal software update mechanism. This is the exact same for WSUS. There is an upgrade option available in the WSUS, assuming you have a hotfix installed, and then you can have WSUS deploy these big feature upgrades. But you don't get any control at all. So I don't use that feature at all in either WSUS or Config Manager. Instead, if you have Config Manager, I will use a Config Manager sequence to do it. If you don't have Config Manager, I use the free version of MDT for it. It's the same sequence. but this is just the sequence that does the upgrade. But since I have a sequence, I can actually control things. So let me see if I can launch Zoom it on this guy. So the people in the sheep seats have some saying in this. But I've added in a control here, a check. Because you can actually these days, you can run setup without doing a setup. You can say, what if I would run an upgrade on this system? Would it work? Yes, no. And it will spit back a return code from that process. It's a number. The number for happiness. This is the number of happiness. Everything else is sadness. So how did I know this? Well, it turned out that the grandfather of all deployment, Mr. Michael Niehaus, he put together a blog post about a year ago that explains this. Not the happiness part, but the return code part. And we're getting there. Shall we go Bing instead? I will pick either one who wins. Google one. Niehaus. Compat. Scan only. Behind the scenes, the sequence is actually running set up with your command line switch to do this validation. I have no idea what that means. Privacy something, probably. That was a bird, right? So here is the switch, and here are return codes. And as you can see, this is the return code in hex. Config Manager or MDT doesn't do hex. They do decimal. So you would take this value, paste it into calculator, convert it into decimal, and you have your code of happiness. Easy as pie. Would it be nicer with a checkbox? Yes, but this is how it works. But the thing is, you can look for other things. Oh, sorry, you're running Kaspersky. Sorry, you're out of disk space. Sorry, something else is broken. And since the setup will give you this information, you can take action on it in the sequence. So you can say if any of this is being returned, you can do something. So if I go back to my site server, of course, I have the action that actually does the upgrade itself, but it will only do that upgrade if it returns happiness. Then, if you're doing Windows 7 to Windows 10, you obviously need to worry about drivers also. But if you're going from Windows 10 to Windows 10, which is the scenario I'm talking about right now, you typically don't need any drivers. I mean, you have Windows 10 on the box already. Hopefully it is working. It will be the same drivers. But I want to run the upgrade, and I may want to do things afterwards. I may want to install updates. I may want to install any applications. Maybe if I do have an incompatible app, I want to uninstall the app before. I will do the upgrade, and I will install the app again. Could be VPN clients that needs to be a new version. But when I have a sequence, I can do all this. I can either add in support for language packs, very common over in Europe. The servicing model, Config Manager, WSUS, doesn't do languages. It doesn't do drivers. It doesn't allow you to give it additional settings. It doesn't allow you to do things beforehand or after. That's why it's so powerful to use sequences. And as I mentioned, if you have Config Manager, use it. If you don't, use MDT Light Touch for it. Light Touch also have a sequence for InPlace Upgrades that will give you the same control. And it is a free and well-tested solution. I can show you that survey just real quick here. I have to admit, I absolutely love the time frame we live in, where you can have a laptop with 64 gigs of RAM and about 6 terabytes of solid-state drives. I'm totally overdoing it. I only have 5.5. But if I switch this one, I will have 6. This is cool. You can have everything you need on a single machine for lab and test environments. Perfect stuff. MDT server, yes. So this is a Windows server running Windows MDT 2013 on it, and this is a similar sequence. Still have the same options. Error handling, do things before, do things after, same process. So that's how I recommend to do InPlace upgrades. Now, back to UEFI. You can't do InPlace upgrade with it, not being supported. But there has been a bunch of community folks, even third-party vendors, figuring out ways to do this in an automated way. The most successful ways so far has been either do a refresh thing or have 2 sequences that does the job. And I've been using the last method the most because it's extremely reliable. The only downside is you need to be at the box when you do it. It's automated, yes, but someone needs to be there. The reason the refresh is scary is because when you go from BIOS to UEFI, you're actually changing the partition tables on the box. And there is a ton of stuff that can go wrong in that process. So I do the following. I will have one sequence that will do a backup only of the machine, if needed. We restore the backup on the server, and in the end, I will simply, somewhere around here, I will call the vendor tools to enable UEFI, possibly upgrade BIOS, sometimes that's needed, and then the machine is destroyed. But I'm cool, because I had the backup before. I will only call the vendor tools if the backup is actually successful. So one sequence that does backup and then the configuration. Then I have a normal bare metal deployment that I run after. Because now the machine is in UEFI, but there is a reboot in between. That would I like to be out the box, press F12, select this sequence instead, and I'm good to go. Can this be automated completely? Yes, it can, but it's tricky. Some vendors allow you to, when you do the BIOS configuration, you can tell it, next time you boot, Mr. or Mrs. Machine, you will pixie boot, thank you. And if you have your collection set up straight in Config Manager, that machine will automatically be picked and pixie booted. But in real life, it's actually easier to be in front of the box. Just back up it remotely, then you go to the machine, boom, start it, and leave. In the end, it will restore the backup. That's the default behavior of the sequences. What about these guys? Every company I've been working with so far has been using these scenarios, also for Windows 10. What does these scenarios have in common? What is it that these guys are using that the normal InPlace upgrade doesn't? That typically are at least a few apps in the image, yes, it's a custom image. You typically use a custom image with these scenarios. You cannot do that with the InPlace upgrade process. And the way I recommend to set this up, it says demo the next slide, I recommend that no matter what you're using to deploy Windows 10, I recommend that you use MDT to build your reference image. because that's an automated process. Basically, find a file server somewhere, install MDT, add in the apps that you would like to have in your reference image, at the very least some runtimes. You add in the image that you wanted to build the reference image of. You do not add in drivers. You do add in packages. Why do I need packages? I mean, in MDT, there is a sequence that builds my image, right? It formats the disk, it applies the Vim file, it installs any apps that I would like to have, and then it runs Windows Update that I enabled. So it will actually go up against the WSUS server and run Windows Update as many times as needed. Good luck in getting that to work with 1607. Doesn't work. They broke it. Unless it's patched. So this is a kind of a catch-22, right? The step that does the update fails because it cannot do the update. Kind of hard to do the update then. But if you download that update here, import it, it will actually stage it during WinPE, offline servicing. So there is, I created a folder here, which I right-clicked and imported the update. The update I got from Microsoft Catalog site, catalog update Microsoft.com. I've been promised that we'll be removing the ActiveX control requirement for this eventually, so that you can script against this, which will be very, very shiny. But here I can search for Windows 10 cumulative updates. I can sort them by date. And here they are. Monday, no, Tuesday, last week, the week before that. See, they're nice. Only a gig in size for the LTSB ones. So I downloaded the latest one, imported it, and what I also did was creating a selection profile, a filter, because this is a feature in MDT, where you can do this. If you don't, you will be in a world of pain. So you select the filter, and then you go to your sequence that builds the Windows 10 image, and you modify the apply patches action to use that filter. The default is this. So if you have updates for Windows 7, for server, for various versions of Windows 10, it will try to install them all for you. And guarantee you this, it won't like the Windows 7 ones. So create the filter, and life is good, because this action, again, look where it's running. It's still in Windows PE. Before we reboot into Windows and try to do the update. So now we do have the latest Windows Update agent, and now the update process actually works. They have fixed most problems now with the update process. The main concern has been the Windows Update agent actually crashing. That has been the main problem. But this is how we build the reference image. So every time, and I have a session today where I will explain this in more detail, but when I need a new reference image of Windows 10, this is what I do. I open up a PowerShell prompt. I go to a folder. I run this script and I'll take a break. Because after an hour, I have a reference image on my server that I can deploy. An image that have my applications, that is fully up to date, that have the runtime components requiring this to actually work, to run apps on. I met very few companies who deploys Windows 10 just to deploy it. they typically won't run some app on it. So therefore, it makes sense to have a sequence that adds in at least some components to it. So that's why in this sequence, in this image, added in .NET Framework 3.5, all the 12 different runtimes for C++, and in this case, Office also. Because Office is a good candidate. If everybody in the organization is using the same version of Office, put it in the image. It's a big application. It can be updated through Microsoft Update, and it's nice to your network. It's quick to install. And then it runs Windows Update. Done. So I will kill this VM. It's not going to be any more fun. And then it will eventually delete it. There is a loop looking for this. But this is how I recommend to build reference images. Fully automated, using a sequence to do it, so that you can repeat the image every day if you like to, every month if you like to, and knowing it will be equally good every single time. Yeah, I know I turned it off. Yes. Didn't like it. But anyway. So once I have that image, if I'm using MDT, did not mean to hide the toolbar, I create a separate deployment share to which I import my reference image. And then I create sequences to deploy it. So when I need a new machine with my Windows 7 or Windows 10 image, let me just pause my config manager server for a while, because if you have multiple Pixie servers on the same network, they typically fight. And it's like the Highlander, you know, there could be only one, and then it will be, yeah, no swords here, though. So this is generation 2 VM. It's using UEFI, so I have to press Enter instead of F12. So it will download a boot image and will present me with a wizard. This is from Star Wars, obviously. Millennium Falcon doing the light speed jump. If there is a way to get around the press enter thing, depends. Yes, you can obviously configure WDS to just go ahead and pixie boot. Config Manager, if you do require deployment, it will do that. But there is a function in Config Manager to enable support for deploying any computer, unknown computer support. That, in combination with the required deployment and no password, is a bad combination. Because it means if you have a machine that accidentally pixie boots, that server is now running Windows 10. So if you are using required deployments, I typically recommend to stage those machines and not enable unknown computer support. But it's up to you guys. It's a quick way to upgrade your data centers. And anyway, in this setup, I'm requiring logon. I think that's a nice idea to do. Light Touch MDT has this by default, this option of presenting a logon dialog box. Config Manager doesn't. Config Manager only has password. But you can combine this from Light Touch with Config Manager. I have a university in Sweden that did this recently, so they're actually authenticating against the Active Directory before they can allow to start a deployment, even with Config Manager. They just added in ADSI to Windows PE, and they're good with it. So I'm logging in, and the cool thing about this wizard in Light Touch is here I'm displaying a list of sequences, and I can display just 2 wizard panes, or I can have 10. It's up to you to control that level of automation. But I can display different sequences or different lists depending on which user I log in as. There's a built-in function in MDT. So if I log in as an admin, I will see all of them. If I log in as a help desk from the client team, I will see Windows 10 images. If I log on as help desk from the server team, I'll see server images. And you guys, you'll see everything, obviously. So I'll simply select an image that I would like to deploy. I will give it a computer name. PC, whatever. Select some apps that I would like to have, and done. This is it. Kicking off the deployment, and life is good. In a week. Promise I clicked. Element, that was a new one. Seen this a few times, but I've never seen that one. The beautiful thing about live demos. This is also nice. I've seen this a few times now with the Server 2016 was released last week, the evaluation version. And sometimes I've seen VMs, when I go to full screen, they will go up to full screen and they kind of never go back again, which is interesting. But let me kick off this one again. And toolbar that are hidden. Select my image, give it a name, select some apps, deploy Windows. I think I had an existing deployment of that box that I just killed the machine in the middle. I typically do that when I demo, and it kind of doesn't like that. But anyway, in about 6-7 minutes, I have Windows 10 on it. It takes it about 3 to apply the WIM file and another 3 to do the rest. And then it takes 5 minutes the first time you log in to generate the profile. So now we're actually, it's take longer to log in than to actually deploy it. But that's a different story. I will kill this one for now. Same thing for Config Manager. You take your reference image from Light Touch, you import that in Config Manager. You do the same thing there. Create your sequences, you pixaboot, and you deploy. If you like to have front ends for Config Manager, where you can actually select things also with Config Manager, you should come to my session 3 today, because that I will actually demonstrate how to do that, and also show where you can download these front ends to actually ask for things like computer name and apps and sequences and whatnot, because it's just a very open architecture. You can combine these things. But to give you a quick summary of things, Windows 10 works. The deployment tools works. What you need to pay attention to are these guys. Think about networking. Think about bandwidth. Think about group policies. And your life is happier. And also remember the code for happiness. All right. Thanks for attending, guys. Have a good conference.